Hi, folks.
Good morning, or good evening.
Good morning.
Yes. It's hard for me to figure out the times after I wake up.
I guess, as always, we should give people a couple of minutes.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, hi. Why is it, Daniel, that you always have like the most exciting virtual as well as real backgrounds?
It's reasonably warm in the UK, and we have to make the most of that. It doesn't happen very often. Greenhouse is over there.
Oh, nice. What are you growing?
We got, I don't know what you can say. We've got some cucumbers. We've got a black currant plant with about 4 black currants on it. Some raspberries, tomatoes, basil, and some chili peppers that are just about starting to fruit.
Nice. Yeah, I just mentioned let's maybe wait another minute or two before we get started for people to join in.
Yeah, I'll be here for the first half of the meeting, but I have to drop for something else.
Okay.
30 minutes in, just as a heads up.
Then probably I'd suggest to kind of switch the order of topics. I'm not sure how Zoom actually works. I pasted the 2 topics into the chat, but I'm not sure if people can see them if they join later. You can't?
I can't see it.
Then I'll just repaste a couple of more times. So we basically have Ram, who's interested in incident management in CF4Kates with a couple of detailed questions, and then it's Kieron and Angela talking about Cloud Foundry custom resources. And that, as I said, probably we should just switch the order to make sure that Angela can ideally follow kind of most of the conversation around the topic where she's mentioned.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
If that all works for folks to switch the ordering.
Okay, then I guess let's just do that. Welcome everybody officially to this week's special interest group call, Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes. Yeah, as mentioned, two topics on the agenda: CF custom resources, which we will start with because Angela needs to jump to another call in 30 minutes from now, and then we have Ram, who's interested in incident management in CF4Kates world. So with that, I guess I would just right away hand it over to Kieron and Angela to talk about their topic.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Rand. I know it's been, I think, about a month since the last CF on Kate's SIG meeting. But I know in the last conversation, we had a lot of discussion about starting to dive into like what a possible technical architecture could look like to actually support like the CF on Kate's vision statement that's been circulated around in the community. And so I think, since then, there's been a little bit of asynchronous communication and thinking about, not only the high level architecture, but what is that user experience like as well. And so I actually wanted to tag along with the topic you suggested of Kieron shared out a document about sort of thinking of like, how do those Cloud Foundry custom resources actually look like? And like, what does that interaction model look like as well? And so maybe we can start by like going into that document a little bit, getting like a high level presentation there, and then hearing folks like general reactions or thoughts. Because I think like maybe taking a step back again, because there's a lot of new folks here, you know, when thinking about the technical architecture for like where we might want to take CF on K8s, I think we've really been thinking about having, you know, really more fully integrating with Kubernetes, and treating custom resources as the source of truth and like integration point, for then being able to, you know, have workloads running. So like having, you know, the CF API, having like a CF API server that actually, instead of, you know, driving objects in a relational database, is creating custom resources on a Kubernetes cluster that then you could create different controllers to like actually implement different outcomes against. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add from, you know, the conversation we had in the last meeting, or any questions about like sort of that high level architecture. I don't see anyone unmuting, so cool. So I just wanted to provide like a brief amount of context to what we talked about last time. And maybe from there, we can go over into the doc that Kieran wrote up, and he can talk a little bit more about that.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties today. My internet's just been down for about an hour, which means I don't have the doc either. But anyway, so I'll try and think about what I wrote a couple of weeks ago.
Would it be helpful to share the, like, someone share the doc on their screen? Like, would that
I'm
be
looking
of
at this
use
on my
to you?
phone, so
Okay.
worry
So
about it.
you would just be squinting.
Yeah. Yeah, so I created that doc a couple of weeks ago after the meeting where we saw the ideas about the CF CLI shim, which was creating the the suggestions for some CRDs that would do. So that was driven through the CF CLI and how that needs to go and interact with CF. So I was trying to consider another use case, which I think we talked about maybe in the CF for K8s vision document. So if we're doing CF on Kubernetes, my assumption was this is a great opportunity to allow people, operators and developers, to do a K8s native way for deploying their apps. And that should feel just as easy as doing a CF push. So by that, I mean, you should be able to create a custom resource that's got the information that you would have in your app manifest and anything you'd pass on the command line. Kubectl apply that. And then that should just be processed like as if you just done a CF push. Leave it there, things will happen, and eventually an app will be running in the end of it. Yeah, and I was wondering how you could do that based on the objects, the CRs that were suggested for the CF shim. And I was just looking at the amount of interaction that was maybe implicit in that design. So I think we started off by creating an app manifest, or the shim did, which contains the details for the manifest. Oh yeah, I can see this a little bit. We need to get the source code in there somewhere. So, I mean, that's a tricky bit, I think, in terms of K8s native way of doing things. Maybe we have to just point it to a Git repository, but we can just assume that happens somehow, I think. I suppose my problem was I want that code to turn into running application without doing anything. I don't want to create a KPAC resource, watch the status of that, wait for that to be finished, and then assign that to my object that I've created or another one that's being created. I don't want it to be a multi-step process. It just should be a declarative thing where I can specify my app, bang, 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 things happen. Yeah, so there's some comments on here, and I realize the whole structure isn't as simple as just being able to create one CR, perhaps. Definitely, you might end up with very many different versions of your app code linked to your app. So I could see how that could be a different CR. But I'd quite like to say, if you just point to one version of your code in one CR, your main app manifest, if that could trigger the generation of a new build object, and then automatically link the things together, saying this is my current build, and then it goes on, and all the other CRs get processed by the controllers to create the app, I think that would be a good thing. Yeah, so if you have this model that's sort of K8s native driven, then I'd say if you've got the CF shim, how could you utilize that? How could you utilize that simple model with the CF shim? So the shim does a whole load of different steps, doesn't it? It goes and creates the thing, it uploads code, it goes and says create a build, it waits for the build to be ready, it links things together. So I think I'm hoping with statuses on that single object, you can represent all those sort of state transitions in that process. And so hopefully you can simplify the suggested design of the shim CR objects as well. That was the hope.
Yeah, I think like maybe to me, like one of the most interesting things is like towards the bottom of like calling out like having a single like desired app, like custom resource, or just having that like one custom resource of like, if you're just interacting directly via like kube control versus like an API server or something else, like having that single object to be modifying rather than having to think about all of the different like relationships between all of the different like maybe like child like resources like build or package or app. And I think that like it is really appealing to just have like sort of that single entry point that like either gets created via like an API shim, or you could apply directly via like kube control in the CLI, because you do sort of get the mapping then of like how do all of these resources interact with each other. Like you can have like owner references on all of the child resources, and like you can check the status of the desired, like I guess in this case, like what's called here, like the desired app, like CR, to see like, okay, did everything actually eventually like get created, or like did something fail along the way?
Yeah, and hopefully like in a production system, you could just have a YAMLs for all your desired apps in your system and then apply the whole lot and wait for it all to come up. I think it's just things that are hard to do with CRs are like if you have to do polling or you have to go and watch something and wait for a status change, it's quite painful. You end up writing your own sort of controller in Go or something if you want to do that easily. We even saw that using Ruby code to do things like that isn't great. So yeah, to keep the thing as simple as possible and sort of use the patterns. Like if you're creating a stateful set or something in K8s, that goes and creates some pods or something underneath it, but you never see them. You can just look at the status on the stateful set and know what's going on. Try and hide the complexity, I think.
Yeah, like I'm like totally on board with hiding the complexity for like kubectl like driven users for it. But for the shim itself, I think a lot of that is like necessary complexity, because we're trying to like take an existing like RESTful API that is already designed, and we already have clients expecting to use it in certain ways. And those clients expect to be able to like pluck out an individual build, one of many builds for a single app, or like an individual droplet or whatever. And to power those endpoints, I think like some of that CR complexity is actually pretty necessary there. We're actually doing like spikes right now to like really like drive out these CR designs a little bit better. Like one way I like to think of the intermediate CRs are those are both like basically meant just to be managed by machine like level users. And like I'd never expect a human to want to like kubectl apply a build like on their own. Like they would apply like the desired app like you proposed. But those things do provide like extension points for us to be able to like swap out like the staging implementation or the runtime implementation, while still like allowing us to like power this thing that looks like the cloud controller, but is using those instead of a database. I think for the relationships that are like definitely many to many, like it gets a lot harder to be able to like collapse that into individual CRs, in my opinion.
What's an example of one of the many-to-many relationships there?
On the doc, I'll link this Miro here. But like basically every child resource under an app is like pretty complicated. So an app has many packages. Those can all be like the CLI can like coordinate staging of multiple packages at the same time. It can like, you'll have multiple builds in flight at any given time. It makes it difficult when you have like many things that could be like in flux to collapse that as saying like the app is a single build and it's ready. And like if we were like doing this from scratch, like it would definitely simplify it to just like take that away and say you can only have a single build in flight, like very much like the like V2 style of CF. But since we're targeting like being able to support V3 clients of CF, like we kind of have to think about it more in terms of what can they do right now.
Okay, I mean yeah. The thing I was just trying to say was just hoping not to have the user creating any of those sort of those objects tracking all that stuff, which sounds like what you're saying as well.
Yeah, I definitely don't want a user to have to like kubectl apply an individual build or something. I think like the desired app that you propose in this doc is like definitely like how you said it's like a stateful set that ends up managing replica sets and pods, but the user doesn't apply those. Like I very much think that it could work like that, and that would be good.
Okay, yeah, cool. I think the other thing is like you think, well, if you're targeting something like Knative at the back end, which has quite a simple interface, you sort of think, where's the complexity coming from on the front end that's just going to sort of fan out and then go back in again to something quite simple. So.
I mean, what I'm hearing maybe as like, I mean, like is, it does sound like there is like synergy and like agreement of like, you know, you don't want users or individuals applying like, you know, individual builds or individual apps or things like that. But maybe there's almost like, you know, a continuation of like the doc, like Karen, that you wrote up of like being a little bit more explicit of like, okay, like how does this, like if we have a desired app, like custom resource, and that's what the user is interfacing with, like what's going on in terms of like, you know, all of like, what is that desired app actually then generating? and like sort of like to your point of like noting that it's like you can get a lot of information off of the status field, like calling out like, yeah, what is that relationship of like what resources are being driven out and like what is it owning and like what's being updated. Because I think like fleshing out what that desired app CR would look like might make it like, I think would bring clarity to like these discussions of being like, okay, like this is the expectation of how, of like the user shouldn't be interacting with any of these resources, but should be interacting with this one. And then also like, meanwhile, if you compare it to like having like, you know, a new API shim, like the API shim might be interacting with some of these child resources for things like get endpoints or so on. But what does the push workflow look like? Can we make sure that it looks similar to like also creating a desired app so that a user could in the future then, if they wanted to bypass like the CLI or the API and be interacting with that like desired app resource directly?
Yeah, exactly. Sounds good. Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of people.
Yeah.
Oh, go for it, Bert.
I was just about to say, Kieran mentioned Knative, and like I haven't looked at Knative for ages, but like when I recall how it started, wasn't it like a very similar model to what I think Kieran was proposing, like the top level entity that then essentially drove many of those sub objects ultimately. So I guess my actual question is, how close or how far away from the way Knative works today is what we are currently discussing?
It doesn't build things for you, does it? So that's the extra bit of complexity we're dealing with.
That's why I said when it started, right? Because back then it used to build also things for you when it still had Knative built as like an integrated thing.
All right.
Yeah, it has evolved.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not the expert on it, but I mean, it does. I mean, you ask for a service, and you get a service with all its networking as well, doesn't it? Whereas we're looking at pluggable networking and things like that, so we'll have additional options. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Angela, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just going to say, I think we have a decent number of folks on this call. So like, I know that there's been like a little bit back and forth, and maybe like, you know, talking about something, not, you know, if you haven't like read the doc or like looked at the Miro board, it's like maybe a little bit more difficult to engage like with like the material and like what we're talking about right now. But I'd be curious just to like check on like, you know, if anybody else like had any other thoughts about like what we've been discussing so far on like, you know, either the overall vision or like, you know, talking about, you know, a desired app like custom resource as like, you know, that single way of like both driving the creation of apps from like an API perspective, but also from like a Kubernetes native perspective as well.
I'll bite. I'm coming into this cold, having not attended for a very long time, and I came to the meeting just to try and get a general sense of where things are at and what people are working on. So if this ends up being a completely noob question and derailing things, tell me to shut up and go back on mute, and I'll happily oblige. So we're talking about defining apps as custom resources. How does the provision of code work there? You know, it's you can provide a custom resource, but where do the bits come in? Again, if this is like taking everyone back to square one and you've got more important things to discuss, tell me to go away and do my homework.
When you say bits, are you referring to the application source code that gets bundled up and deployed? So the idea there was we'd still be using something like KPAC. and having that source code live somewhere that then gets built into an OCI compliant image by like KPAC or whatever, and then the output of that being the image that gets attached to the object. So it would probably come in updated on the desired app, and then that gets filtered down to the child objects. But yeah, we're still using some sort of one or more build tools that lives inside of the Kubernetes cluster with an eye towards trying to make it as compatible as possible with whatever offerings are there, recognizing that you can't do that for everything, but whatever we can use, we'd like to use. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yep, very much so.
Cool.
One thing I want to point out though is for the shim, it's more clear how that works because the CLI would be pushing source code in its traditional flow, and then that would convert it into an image that KPAC would use as a source. For the desired app, where you just kubectl apply a CR, it's less clear where that source code comes from. And I think that's what Kieran was talking about. Like maybe you have to give it a Git repo, or maybe you have to pre-build that source image or provide a blob or something. That one I think is fuzzier about what that workflow would look like.
Yeah, and if you're using Git, then it opens other doors, doesn't it? Like, do you watch that Git repo for changes and things like that, and automatically build things, automatically update or not?
Yeah, and I think you kind of get into a spiraling. You end up taking on the responsibilities of CI/CD pipeline at that point, which is kind of out of scope of the current implementation of Cloud Foundry and the user experience. I do wonder whether massive sort of leap away from how things currently work, but whether there is a need for something like a CI/CD pipeline build pack that you tell Cloud Foundry about where your app happens to live and what CI/CD system you use, and there is a pipeline spawned and generated and set on whatever CI/CD server that you have, so then you've got that continuous pushing of things into Cloud Foundry, because otherwise you've got that the issue of with an imperative CF push, even if that's affected via a kubectl apply, it's a point in time, right? And that's kind of counter to the modern GitOps way of doing things, and always it's been a kind of missing part of the picture.
Yeah, it'll probably become more clear over time what direction we want to go. I would point out that KPAC already supports some of this stuff out of the box. You can point it at a Git repo. So theoretically speaking, there's at least some prior art for doing things like that. But yeah, it's something where we got to be careful because we don't want to bite off too much before we're ready to support that.
My other feedback would have been like the names that we give to that entity, like desired application or application manifest, etc., etc. That at least to me kind of sounds like kind of the old implementation is shining through, right? So I'm kind of wondering why isn't that an application, right? Like if that is the thing that an end user would want to create, then I guess an end user would want to create an application, at least in kind of Cloud Foundry terminology. But that's just naming, right? But
yeah, I think we'll definitely want to get the names right so that we don't leak through like old abstractions or just default to, this is what we ported over from like Cloud Foundry, like as is, but the names don't quite match up to like expectations now. I need to drop for my other call, but this has been a really great discussion. Thank you for switching the ordering. And maybe like next steps wise, I know we have like the next meeting in a couple of weeks, but I think like we've started to, one thing might be looking at like a little bit more about like this desired app or however you want to call it, like the front end face, and like think about like how does this actually interact and like drive some of these like other CF custom resources so that we can share that out asynchronously and talk about that as a group in the next SIG.
Cool. Yep.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Angela. So topic-wise, I'm not sure if like we have concluded on this one, or if there's like additional inputs for this one. And at the same time, I cannot really completely judge how much time we'll take for Ram's topic. So any thoughts? Should we conclude for now on the first topic on the CRD? Or is there any additional aspects we should cover now?
I think we're good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then I guess over to Ram to ask his question directly and kind of give us a little bit more context on where the question is coming from.
Thanks, Bernd. So the reason I put that question up there was because a lot of the sort of advocacy and the tutorials and the educational stuff that we've been putting out this far has typically been with regards to here's how you deploy a Java app, here's how you deploy a JavaScript app, and if you're like real hipster, here's how you do like React and Prisma and what have you, right? So a lot of it has been focused on that developer experience and not an awful lot on the platform operations or some sort of like day to stuff with regards to CF for kids. And so we've been having to field a lot of questions in terms of how do I set up monitoring for my apps that are running on CF for kids? How do we set up, like, to give a very specific example, how do I set up like an ELK stack equivalent for CF for kids and things like that? So we've sort of been getting a nudge towards the ops side of things a lot. And I thought I could start with the folks who typically gather on this call and getting some wisdom, some stories from the trenches, what have you, or just in terms of high-level design about here's how we are thinking of incident management when it comes to CF for kids. Here's how it's been in the past. Here's some refinements that we imagine would be good. Here's how it is with like vanilla Kubernetes, and so with CF, here are some of the changes that we thought might be useful. So anything with regards to like reading and managing logs, setting up alerts, doing like Prometheus, Grafana dashboards, all of that, I think is useful information for me at this point.
That's Ram. So any real world experiences while people are looking into CF for kids?
I can jump in here a little bit with our experience. So we built some custom dashboards and deployed Prometheus operator and have Grafana working with alerting and stuff like that. We use it mainly to monitor the CF stack, like latency and the processing of Istio, how fast it can reconcile, I guess, whenever it's processing changes. And it helps us decide when we need to scale up CF for kids, as we've been growing over 100 apps now. So we really liked the ability to scrape our apps. You have the annotation support built in, so it's pretty easy to add metrics to any of the apps that we deploy, and you have a lot of metrics already available on a lot of the CF components. So that's been great. Where we're seeing it lacking is in the log aggregation side of the CF system components. We'd like to see something that could aggregate those logs. We have something similar like on Bosch with Logaggregator, and we can ship those to Elasticsearch and we can get those logs and have alerting based on those logs. But since we have multiple replicas of a lot of the CF components now, it gets difficult to understand errors when they happen because we have to be checking a lot of different pods and then containers inside those pods as well. So that's kind of where we've had, and especially as you guys talked about moving more to custom resources, understanding like the latency of when those are getting processed or where things are going wrong, I think is going to be really important.
Yeah, so regarding logs processing, so it sounds like you're indeed like looking into the Kubernetes logs directly to kind of get an understanding of where the system is, right? So as opposed to, I don't know, having a daemon set that kind of collects all the logs and streams them out to kind of a completely separate system like Logstash, Kibana, etc., stack, or to kind of analyze the logs there.
Right, and since CF4K deploys FluentD already, it would be great if we had some ability to customize it and ship those out to Elasticsearch. I think like right now you push, and if you get an error from CF push, you're kind of lost at where to look next. And then if you have scale, it becomes really difficult to find out why that error occurred, especially if it just says some generic error message like package failed to upload or something like that, which I've seen quite a bit in the Slack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess like when it comes to scale, at least in the Bosch-based world, I think as you mentioned, our approach always has been like extract everything to other more specialized systems and kind of do the heavy lifting there. That's I guess also why we like at scale have been facing and continue to face issues with like Logragator as kind of a built-in aggregation system in kind of classical Cloud Foundry. I guess from our experience, we would have loved to kind of just take all the logs and do as little log processing in Cloud Foundry itself as possible and kind of allow external systems to do all the heavy lifting. That's at least, as I said, our experience from a Bosch-based world.
Yeah, we have a Bosch-based deployment as well that's fairly large, and we collect all of it from Log Aggregator and ship it off to Logstash as well, and that's where we do most of the heavy lifting is in Logstash. And I think something similar using FluentD on Kubernetes, and operators can choose where to ship their logs using FluentD since there's a ton of plugins for that already. I think that would be a great first step.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to Ram's initial question, I believe like in reality, the kind of operational experience with CF4K's deployments compared to Bosch managed deployments is just very, very small still. Unless somebody says, no, like there's quite large deployments, but yeah, at the moment, I would say experience is small compared to what we know from like Bosch managed CF. And probably also if I look into the Kubernetes space, I'm not sure if like, okay, yeah, on the metric side, maybe, but on the logging side, I don't see kind of a complete standardization, but I see just a bunch of solutions that people use there. On the metric side of the house, I guess Prometheus is kind of what most people choose, but yeah. So not sure anybody else has some additional answers for RAM. I guess another aspect you had, RAM, was like comparing that to vanilla Kubernetes and what people are doing there for logs and metrics, right?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I just wanted to find out if from a platform design perspective, if we are taking any steps in the design of CF for K8s, or if we're taking anything into consideration with regards to let's do log management this way, let's do metrics this way, let's do alerts this way, or are we just leaving it to here's standard sort of API formats and let folks just hook their tools in and grab the stuff that they need.
I guess no definitive answer from this round, it seems. Okay, so yeah, I'm not sure. Any additional aspects to the set of questions that Ram raised, or do we need to leave it with what we've mentioned so far? Yes, it's probably the latter. Interpreting the silence. So yeah, any additional topics that we should cover in like the remaining 15 minutes? Any things that people want to discuss?
The only thing I'm going to mention is with our sort of exploratory spike work, we have moved that to a publicly visible GitHub repository. So we'd love for people to take a look at it and like comment, but it's also particularly named as an explorations repo. So don't get too scared if you see something that looks like suboptimal or whatever. That's the purpose of it, is we're just trying to sort of get some stuff down and start exploring it. So everything's malleable, but it's also available for everyone to take a look at. So cool. That's just what I wanted to point out before anyone gets too scared about things.
Tim has put the link to the repository into the chat, so it's under the Cloud Foundry organization, so people should be able to find it.
For those of us not following the project as closely as perhaps we should, are things still very much in an exploratory kind of finding our way and spiking sort of phase, and have any vendors committed to commercializing a K8s-based distribution of Cloud Foundry yet?
We're pretty much doing the sort of exploration phase right now. I am probably not the right person to talk about any commercialization of this stuff, since I try to focus my efforts on a lot of the open source space and making sure that's in good shape. But at this point, basically, we want to see what that world looks like. So because we've been focusing on CF for K8s and like working as a Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes, and we get it in relatively stable shape, we are now able to devote a little bit more attention to thinking like, okay, so going forward, what might the world look like if we decide to sort of change some of these things up, and sort of don't get stagnant, keep exploring. If
That makes sense.
Tim, do you have any thoughts you want to offer?
No, that what you just said resonates with me. Nothing to add.
Okay. Any last minute topics? Questions? If not, I guess we can close a little bit earlier. Thank you very much for now. And I'll send out the poll for next time. And I believe Angela already made an offer to kind of follow up on the progress of the investigation next time. So we'll take it from there. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Cool.
Talk to
Thanks
you
very much,
soon.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.